Welcome back to the show, everyone. We have Father Jason Charron, a Ukrainian Catholic priest, with us today. Father, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's great to have you back today. I was wanting to discuss Ukraine. Now, obviously, you have a lot of insight into this. You've been to Ukraine. You have personal ties to Ukraine. I did want to ask you about the Ukrainian war. Maybe to set this up, it seems like there's politically in the U.S. a liberal view and a conservative view, you could say. The liberal view talking about how Russia is just going to take over everything and we need to protect Ukraine and, be very aggressive there, and that the Russia invasion of Ukraine is completely unprovoked. And then there's the conservative view. You might, listen to Tucker Carlson, hear something like this, where they say throughout the last many, many decades, the U.S. has been pushing NATO closer and closer to Russia. And repeatedly, Russia has said, don't push it anymore. And we've agreed to not push NATO any further. And then we say Ukraine should become part of NATO, and Russia invades. So it seems to be very much provoked by NATO. And it seems to be completely unnecessary as well. There's no strategic benefit there. And it seems like kind of a needless war. So I guess putting that all out there, what is your perspective on the Ukraine-Russia conflict right now? And also, I guess, coming from a Catholic point of view as well, what should be our response?
Yep. Our response, those are all great and fair questions. Our response should be guided by principles, not politics and not personalities. And over the past 3 years, my fellow conservatives with whom I align on faith, freedom, the right to life, all of these things, they've gotten it wrong on Ukraine. God alone is perfect. I don't expect them to hit every issue bang on every time. Only God is perfect. And on this issue, they are wrong because they have shifted. Instead of looking at this conflict through the eyes of principles informed by faith and reason, they've instead changed that in for a perspective that's informed by politics and personalities. Politics by looking at what and who our enemies are aligned with, and then going in the opposite direction. It's contrarian. And in terms of personalities, of attacking President Zelensky, with whom I don't agree on a lot of things, but making it about his imperfections, and therefore we are justified in not supporting the Ukrainian people. Again, if we use that logic during the Second World War, where would Poland be? Because Poland was led by Masons and socialists who were hostile to the church. The governing class of 1938 Poland was Marxist, and Marxist it is political in its polity, and it was Masonic in its alliances. That's not conspiracy theory; that's established. But the West aligned with Poland because it was a matter of principle that their sovereignty, their self-defense of their women, their children, their language, their culture was a prima facie cause for self-defense. And so the West supported Poland, right? The same goes for Ukraine, is that this is not something that Ukraine did. It was something done to them. It's not Ukrainian tanks in Moscow. It's Russian tanks in Ukraine. It was not Ukraine that, upped the ante with rhetoric. No, they were trying to speak peace and into Russia's ear. So this is, first of all, informed by our faith, because our faith urges us when there is conflict to go according to principles derived from faith in Christ, the Beatitudes, the Gospels, 10 Commandments, and by the right exercise of reason. And that is something that our conservative brothers and sisters have not done. And even on their own terms, our conservative brothers and sisters are wrong because they've abandoned the principle, the example rather, of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was one who stood up to evil empires and was consistent with our allies. People who dared to align themselves with America's interest and then faced the backlash for it. Under Reagan, they received American support. What's happened, for example, under the leftism, is there's been this isolationism. And you see it with, for example, during the Second World War. It was many of the on the left who said, we don't need to get involved. We're just going to stay here. And that same mentality, was shown during the Vietnam War. That's a problem there. We don't need to get involved in there. And again, it's that same mentality that is, I would place it left of center at work here. We don't need to be involved there. And that violates our image abroad. We are the country that sticks to our principles and stays with our friends. So it leads to the question, why is Ukraine our friend? Ukraine is our friend because they did what we told them to do. In 1996, it was the American government that strong-armed Ukraine into giving up not only all of its ballistic missiles, but all of its nuclear warheads. And we pressured the country into doing it, and they accepted that, the Budapest Memorandum, under guarantees that the United States would secure its sovereignty. Had the United States not been involved in that in 96, Ukraine would still have its nuclear warheads, and there's no way Russia would have attacked. So it is our fault that this is the way it is, and we created the pretext for this, and so we have to be involved in resolving it. And as for what you said about NATO, this is a Russian talking point that is contradicted by history. Russia was invited to the table of NATO in 2000. And they wanted special treatment. And so they excused themselves from the line because they didn't want to stand in line with Hungary. And it wasn't NATO forcing itself on the neighboring countries. It was these neighboring countries running into NATO's arms because of the long list of Russian grievances. And you can speak about Moldova from 1992. It wasn't NATO forcing Russia to brutalize Moldova in 92. It was Russia doing it. It wasn't NATO forcing Russia to kill people in Abkhazia, part of Georgia, in 1993. It was Russia doing that because of its imperialistic ideology. It wasn't NATO that forced Russia to use disproportionate force against the poor Chechenian people who wanted self-determination, something that Russia is asking Ukraine to do for Russian speakers in the Donbass and Crimea. No, NATO didn't force any of that. This is something Russia did. These are unforced errors. They used brutal force on the Chechens, on the Georgians. They subverted the Moldovans. They did this to the Ukrainians. And then in an area of military presence, they've been doing this in the Central Asian countries. So none of this has anything to do with NATO's fault. This is Russia going back 30 years, establishing a history of aggression to its neighbors. And if you're living in those countries, you'd be foolish not to want to have some kind of protection for your family. And that's the truth of the matter.
On the conservative side, the response then would be, well, was it a mistake for the U.S. to get involved with Ukraine in the first place, right? You mentioned not having nuclear weapons in Ukraine based on what happened in 1996. So do you think that was a mistake, or do you think that U.S. Protection of Ukraine is a good thing given the situation of what Russia wants?
Yeah, well, I think there's no good going to come out of playing Monday night quarterback, is that the fact is we have to deal with reality and not what could have been. And the reality is the United States did get involved. They did give security guarantees. Ukraine did believe us. Ukraine did give up its nukes. And that's reality, and that's what we have to deal with. We can get into the subjective fear game of theorizing what could have been and should have been. Personally, I think it was a long-term better security for Ukraine to tell the United States to go away. We're going to keep our nukes, and thank you very much. The fact is, they didn't do it, and we gave them our word. So if we're going to follow the isolationist voices in the conservative wing of our country, then long term we are undermining our friends. Just like the Biden administration undermined our friends in Afghanistan by pulling out militarily abruptly, so too we do that when we pull out of our security guarantees with countries like Ukraine. And if we do this to Ukraine, guess how Taiwan is going to feel? Guess how South Korea is going to feel? And at the end of it, there are going to be no countries that are going to trust us for their long-term security, because they're going to look at Ukraine and they're going to say, you promised the world to them, and when it got tough, you abandoned them to murder and genocide.
These are silver bars. Silver, in many languages, actually means money. You may have noticed inflation a little bit in the last few years, the prices of everything rising. Well, what it actually is the value of the dollar falling. If you're concerned about the US dollar falling even more in value, if you're concerned about the stability of the banking system, or if you're concerned about the ever-expanding US national debt, you can invest in physical precious metals. These assets have never gone to zero in 6,000 years. Simply call 419-490-5295. I'm a Miles Franklin precious metal broker. Miles Franklin has been in business for over 30 years, with no complaints ever registered. Simply give me a call and we'll discuss your needs. A lot of experts look at the situation right now and kind of in a very, pessimistic view of what is going to happen to Ukraine in the next couple of years, and that it seems like Russia has the upper hand in this conflict. What is your perspective on the situation on the ground right now? And we were just talking before the interview about maybe doing this interview, in a week or so, but you said that, time is of the essence now. So what are the latest regarding what's happening right now in Ukraine?
The latest is that they're on their heels and they're suffering. Russians are advancing slowly, but it's a sure and steady advance. And it's it's not because of lack of Ukrainian will. It's because we promised them dollars and gave them pennies. We promised them armaments and we were slow to deliver. And when we did deliver, it was less than what we promised. And so you can only do that for so long before it has kinetic effects and it has spiritual effects. People become dispirited and despondent. And that is reflected on the battlefield. So it's not because they lack the will to fight. I mean, they were given a week to live, and here they are 3 years later still fighting. But we promised them the hill, and we gave them a spoonful of earth. That's the central truth that is that we're facing here. I think it would have been better had at the beginning of this, the Americans, if you want to play the guessing game, just said, you know what, we're not getting involved at all. And then Ukraine would have been forced to go to the Europeans and spend their time and energy coordinating with the Europeans for their defense. But the fact that we didn't the fact that we promised them billions of dollars in aid and military assistance, and then when they lined up with their bowl and their cup, we open up the spigot and just let a trickle out, is dishonest.
I think it's really important and difficult what you're saying, that we can't kind of say, well, what it could have, should have done it differently, right? But we have to face the reality where we are right now, which I think is a very difficult situation. So for our viewers, how should people be looking at this in that regard moving forward? And obviously prayer is very powerful. We can pray, but what are some other action steps for moving forward, do you think, in this regard?
Yeah, well, first of all, if prayer is first and foremost, this is a spiritual conflict of which, the missiles and the bullets are just a manifestation. The second thing is if you know someone, they need aid. I'm kind of at the end of my rope after 3 years of asking people, and people have given so much. But, if you're able to help, please, give me money that I can give to them. I mean, I have priests there and doctors there that I send money to, and I know that it gets to people who are in desperate need. So if you know people then send it to them. If you don't know anybody, contact me and I'll send whatever you give straight to them. Clothing, food, you name it. The other thing is of a political nature is simply calling your representative. They tally the number of phone calls that they receive. And, it's important for you to call in and say, hey, I'm just calling because I want you to support our friends in Ukraine, their fight for freedom. And we cannot abandon them like we did to our friends in Afghanistan. It doesn't mean always, financial support. In fact, Ukrainians don't ask for that. But any of the military equipment that we're just laying out in our military waste yards, junkyards that aren't being used, and there are huge amounts of armaments and things like that just sitting around in, military, graveyards. Just send them to Ukraine. They will use them to defend their children. That's it. Is prayer, pray, the faith of the hands. Sending tangible, physical, material assistance to people, and political is calling your congressman and congresswoman and asking them to prioritize this.
And if you wouldn't mind maybe sending me a link for people to follow there then, and if they can, definitely donate to the cause, and we'll put a link in the description for that. But I guess before we let you go, Father Jason, are there any last thoughts about the current situation, things that people should definitely keep an eye on or be knowledgeable of?
Yes, this was all predicted it was all predicted by Our Lady of Fatima that Russia would spread its errors. Putin has said that the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the implosion of the Soviet Union, and he's never recanted that. He still believes that. And so with that, there cannot be at the same time a belief on the part of our fellow Catholics and Christians that Russia is going to bring about a renewal of traditional values when they still hold May Day parades lifting up images of Stalin. You cannot have Stalin and our Savior. They don't go together. They can't have it both ways. Domestically, Russia cannot be being nostalgic over the Soviet Union, and while internationally projecting itself as a defender of traditional morality. You cannot have it both ways. That's the way it is in Russia right now. And this was predicted by Our Lady of Fatima, Russia's errors. And finally, people need to realize that it was also predicted by Mark Steyn in his book, America Alone, 2006. In there, he said, it's not if Russia will attack its neighbors, it's a matter of when Russia will attack its neighbors, because it comes down to the abortion question. Russia was the first nation to institute abortion, and it is suffering a demographic implosion. And it uses the pretext of NATO, the pretext of international politics, of language, of culture to justify its actions. But the dirty skinny on all of this is that Russia will cease to exist as an empire and then as a nation because it doesn't have people. And it is desperate to maintain its existence and reversing its demographic losses by its high abortion rates and the culture, the anti-life culture, by doing a quick recoup of populations from its neighbors. And if we let them get away with it in Ukraine, they're going to do the same thing in Kyrgyzstan, in Tajikistan, in Kazakhstan, in Poland, in Belarus, in Lithuania, in Estonia, in Moldova. So let's learn the lesson from the Second World War. And if we would have stopped Hitler when he was in Alsace-Lorraine, when he was in Czech Republic, we wouldn't have had the disaster we did. We didn't want to fight him then, and we ended up in a far worse situation. It's the exact same scenario now. Let's learn from history.
I think it's good to learn from history as well. I guess one last question I did have for you is, I think a lot of people are concerned about the situation right now escalating beyond what we can control, right? You have, the U.S. versus Russia, two major nuclear powers. So how does this conflict get resolved without, ending in World War III?
Yeah, this is part of Russia's ploy. It has two weapons. It has nuclear weapons and it has the threat of nuclear weapons. And it doesn't want to use nuclear weapons. It resorts to fear-mongering and the threat of the nuclear weapon, which sometimes can be the fear of it can be worse than the actual deployment of a tactical nuclear weapon. And so that's what Russia's banking on. It's banking on hysteria and irrationality as part of psychological warfare to wear down the enemy. And the truth is that Russia is at a breaking point. It has to bring in soldiers from Nepal, from India, from North Korea, their own boys, the sons of these talking heads. When you watch I watch Russian channels from time to time, none of their sons are dying on the front line. It's the ethnic minorities from Buryatia in the Far East, and it is hired mercenaries from third world countries who are doing this. Why? Because Russia cannot afford to lose its own sons. It's in that critical of a situation. So we need to use truth as a weapon here. And the truth is that it's Russia that is desperate. It's not us. And they will speak about this escalating if they don't get their way. But the truth is, it's a paper tiger. I've lived there before in the areas occupied by Russia and areas near Russia. And I tell you, what we were afraid of in the Soviet Union was a paper dragon. It appears to be strong, but it is not really strong. Ukraine was not a great army, and 3 years on, they still can't beat them. So this is part of their psychological warfare, is to tell us that we can't escalate it, when in fact it's they themselves who are have their back against the wall.
Father Jason, Charron, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
May God bless you.